All right, wife. I'm going to try to do a little better with the timing for chapters this time, so let's get into it. But I will be honest, there are a few really cool chapters. And I'll try to pay extra attention to the relationship ones, because again, I know you like that. This first chapter is one of those, so. All right, chapter 7 is titled Playing with Fire. We go to Egwene, who is basically dragging Elain along the hallways to Rand's chambers. They go up to the Aiel, who are guarding Rand's doors, and say, "We want to check on his wounds." And they're like, "Yeah, they might be bothering him. He's been in a bad mood today. He already chased off a group of High Lords. He even threw High Lord Torian, literally threw him out of the room. He flew all the way to those columns over there almost." And he points. And Egwene's thinking, damn, how much has Rand changed? He never used to be violent like that. Holy crap. But she's like, we still need to see him. And Gaul, the Aiel guarding, says, "Of course, I said I," and lets him through. They walk in, and Rand's just sitting there, laying on a chair, reading a book. And he hears them and snaps the book shut and jumps up, ready to almost fight. But then he sees who they are, and his, frown goes away. And Rand tells him, "I thought you were someone else. Sorry. Some people want things I can't give, things I will not give." And then Elain noticed his tone gets harder, and he says, "What do you want? Did Moiraine send you? Are you supposed to convince me to do what she wants?" And Egwene's like, oh my god, I swear this isn't intentional. She says, "Don't be a goose." She's like, "We just want to help you." And he's like, "Fine, with what? Unless you know how to make these High Lords keep their word when I'm not staring at them directly, or how to stop unwanted dreams. Or do either of you know how to translate the old tongue? I'm trying to understand these prophecies." And then Egwene is like, "No, we came to help you with channeling the one power. Moiraine said that a woman cannot teach a man how to channel any more than a woman could teach a man how to bear a child." But Egwene wasn't convinced, because she's felt something woven from Sidon once. And she's learned so much in the last year. Surely there's something we can do, she says. And Rand says suspiciously, "Are you sure Moiraine didn't send you here, trying to convince me by some roundabout way? I agreed to meet some of the High Lords this morning, and if I don't look at them, they'll find ways around what I want. But they'll learn sooner or later. I rule Tyr now. Me, the Dragon Reborn. I will teach them." And Egwene's like, no, we just want to help. No one sent us. It might not work, but you can at least try. Like, we care about you, Elain and I. And, if we care to try, surely you can. You can't give us 1 hour of your time for your own life? And Rand feels a little guilty and looks down at his feet and mumbles, "I'll try. What do you want me to do?" Suddenly, Egwene embraces Saidar and says, "Look at me." And she takes in as much of the one power as she could possibly hold, as if every particle of her was filled with light. She's never before held this much, and she's surprised that she's not just quivering by the amount of energy. It feels like fireworks bursting within her. She felt like dancing and singing and just wanted to lie back and let it go through her. But she forced herself out of it and says to Rand, "What do you see or feel? Look at me, Rand." And Rand's just like, "I see you. What am I supposed to see? Are you touching the source?" Moiraine has channeled around me 100 times. I can't see a woman's weaving of the one power. Men cannot see Saidar, and women cannot see weaves of Sidon. Even I know that much. And Egwene is overcome with the amount of power that she feels, and she's like, "I could do so much more than Moiraine." Maybe I can heal the wound in Rand's side. And so she reaches out, just barely, with some air and water and spirit, the normal powers used for healing, and she feels the injury on his side with Saidar. But after one touch, one little weave, she recoiled, shivering, snatching it back, and her stomach churned as if every meal she ever eaten wanted to come up at once. It seemed to her like all the darkness in the world was inside Rand's wound, all the world's evil festering, barely covered by tender scar tissue. And she thinks, how can he bear this pain? How is he not just weeping at every moment? But she does her best to recover, and Rand just says, I don't feel anything. Goosebumps, at best. And no wonder. I can't help but feel nervous when a woman's channeling around me. She lets go of the power and asks, I'm not touching the source now, Rand. Do you still feel goosebumps? And Rand's like, no, but that's just because you told me. See, I started thinking about it, and I have them again. Egwene suddenly smiles, and she didn't even bother looking at Elaine to confirm what she already sensed. And Egwene tells Rand, you can sense a woman embracing the source, Rand. Elaine is doing that right now. It doesn't matter what you see or don't. You felt it. That's more than anyone ever thought possible already. Let's see what else we can find. Rand, embrace Sidon. Her voice almost gives out at the end because she's out of fear, but she realizes, as she and Elaine talked about earlier, he's Rand, not a monster from stories, not just the childhood fear of a man who can channel. That's Rand, the boy she grew up with. And so she asks, do you see anything, Elaine, or feel anything? And she says no. And Egwene's like, you said we'd do as we asked, Rand. Are you? Are you even holding Sidon? If you felt something, surely I should too. And I don't. And suddenly she goes, ah! And yells. Something pinched her bottom. And Rand's lips are twitching, clearly fighting a grin. And she just tells him, that was not nice. And Rand's like, you said you wanted to feel something, and I just thought, ah! And he yells, and Egwene jumps up, and he clasps a hand to his buttocks, and hobbled in a circle, and he's like, blood and ashes, Egwene, there's no need for that. Egwene looks over at the glow of Saidar fading from Elaine. And Egwene looks over back at Rand and says, I would have expected that from Mat, but not you, Rand. We came to help you. And Rand gets angry, and he's like, do something. You had no call to do that. I'm going to be limping. You want me to do something? And suddenly, Egwene and Elaine lift up into the air, and they're staring at each other. There is nothing holding them. They couldn't see any flows, but they knew Sidon is holding them. Sidon made of air. And they think to themselves, especially Egwene, thinking he has no right to do this, and it's time he learned it. And so she says the same barrier that we cut Joya off from the source with would stop him too. And so she opened herself to Saidar, and her stomach sank. Saidar was there. She could feel its warmth and light, but there was nothing for her to grab. There was an absence, like a stone wall between her and the true source. She tried to shout, but all that came out was a croak, and Rand says, you want me to do something? And suddenly small tables in the room start flexing their wooden legs, the wood creaking, and they begin to dance in the air all over the place with the gold flakes that are gilding them falling off. And he yells, do you like this? And fire flared up in the fireplace. Or this, and the stag and wolves above the fireplace begin to slump. And all the gilded gold of the furniture comes together in these narrow sheets of metallic cloth. Do something. Do something. Do you have any idea what it's like to touch Sidon, to hold it? Do you? I can feel the madness waiting, seeping into me. And then the tables burst into flames like torches, and books spun into the air, the pages fluttering everywhere. The mattress on the bed erupted into flame, and feathers shower across the room like snow. For a brief moment, Rand just stares at the tables, and then suddenly Egwene and Elaine are able to reach the ground again, whatever holding them disappear, and the blaze in the fireplace winks out, and everything falls back to the floor. Egwene suddenly embraces Saidar, ready to give Rand a piece of her mind, but he looks not happy about it. He looks almost defeated. He doesn't even seem a danger. And Rand just says quietly with a strained laugh, "They might not want to give me another mattress. A mattress a day is probably more than they're willing to." And he tries to avoid looking at the girls and says, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Sometimes it runs wild. Sometimes there's nothing when I reach it, and sometimes it does things I don't. I'm sorry. Perhaps you better go." I seem to say that a lot. And Egwene's like, "No, we said we'd help you. We're not done." And Rand just sits down and says, "All right, what do you want me to do? I promise I won't do anything but what you ask." And she asks, "Why don't you just tell us? How do you embrace the source? Tell us step by step." And he's like, "It's more like wrestling than embracing." "Step by step, huh? Well, first I imagine a flame, and then I push everything into it. Hate, fear, nervousness, everything. And when they're all consumed in that, there's an emptiness, a void inside my head, and I'm in the middle of it." And Egwene's like, your father used to talk about stuff like that. He called it the flame in the void." And Rand nodded. And he's like, "Yeah, Tam taught it to me. And when I'm in it, there's nothing but me and the light. No, even emotion is outside of the void, not within me. I used to have to do it a little bit at a time, but now it all comes at once." And Elaine shivers and is like, "No emotion? That doesn't sound like what we do." But Egwene's like, "Yes, it does. Rand, I imagine myself to be a rosebud, and then I am the rosebud. That's kind of like your void. And the rosebud's petals open to the light of Saidar, and I let it fill me, all light and warmth and life and wonder, and I surrender to it. And by surrendering to it, I control it. That was the hardest part to learn for me, really, how to master Saidar by submitting to it. But it seems so natural now, I don't even think about it. That's the key, Rand, I'm sure it is. You have to learn to surrender to..." And he shakes his head vigorously, and he's like, "That's nothing like what I do. Let it fill me? I have to reach out and take hold of Sidon. Sometimes there's nothing when I do, but if I didn't reach for it, I could stand there forever and nothing would happen. It fills me all right once I take hold, but surrender to it? Egwene, if I surrendered even for a minute, Sidon would consume me. It's like a river of molten metal, an ocean of fire, all the light of the sun gathered in one spot. I have to fight it to make it do what I want. Fight just to keep from being eaten. But I know what you mean about life. Colors are sharper, smells more clear. Everything is more real somehow. I never want to let it go once I have it, even as it's trying to swallow me. But it's different than what you do." And Egwene's like, "Well, can you tell flows apart? Air, water, spirit, earth, fire?" And Rand's like, "Sometimes, but not usually. I just take what I need to do what I want, fumble for it a lot. Sometimes I do a thing, but it's only after that I know what I did or how. It's almost like I'm remembering something I've forgotten." "But you do remember how," she said. "How did you set fire to those tables?" And because in her head, she's like, "I think I know a way to make them dance, like with air and water. But, Rand did a lot of things that I don't know how. Just now." But Rand says, "I don't know. When I want to light a fire, I just make it, but I don't know how I do it. I don't really need to think when I want to do things with fire." And Egwene thinks to herself, "That's fair. Fire and earth are the strongest weaves in men, whereas air and water were the strongest in women. Both are good at spirit." But then Elaine spoke up. "Do you know how you extinguish the flames? You seem to be thinking before they went out." And he's like, "I do, because I don't believe I've ever done that before. I took in heat from the tables and spread it into the stone of the fireplace. A fireplace wouldn't even notice that much heat." And Elaine just gasps And Egwene just recoiled in almost sympathy, because she remembered when Elaine tried to do exactly what Rand described and came out of it with blisters all over her arms, and that was just with a small lamp, let alone a fireplace. The Aes Sedai Shiriam, Mistress of Novices, told her it wasn't a matter of strength. Heat, once it's taken in, just can't be gotten rid of. Not by the strongest people. Women had burst into flame trying before. And Rand asks, what's the matter? And she's like, I think you just proved the difference to me. And he's like, oh, does that mean you're ready to give up? And she's like, no. We'll find a way. And he's like, you tried, thank you. But not today. I suppose you need to be going, and I need to tell the High Lords some things about taxes. They seem to think they can take as much from a farmer in a poor year as a good year. And I'm going to put a stop to that. And as he seems to be expecting them to go, Egwene brings up the real reason, or the second reason, rather, she wanted to be here, and she says to him, Rand, I cannot marry you. And Rand says, I know. And she's surprised that he's not taking it as hard as she thought. And she's like, I don't mean to hurt you. I don't really, but I don't want to marry you. And Rand says, I understand, Egwene. I know what I am. No woman could. You wool-brained idiot, she says. This has nothing to do with you channeling. I just don't love you. At least not in the way you want. Yeah, not in the way to marry you. And Rand suddenly does look surprised and says, you don't love me? Please try to understand, Rand, she says. People and feelings change. I love you like a brother, perhaps more than that, but not to marry. And he grins, and he's like, I really am a fool. I didn't think about you changing too. No, Egwene, I don't want to marry you either. If you knew how much this means to me, not having to pretend anymore, not having to be afraid that I'll hurt you. I never wanted that, Egwene, not to hurt you. And she says, I didn't want to hurt you either, but now I really must go. I know you'll find someone else. And she kisses his cheek, and he just says, of course. But Egwene hears in his voice he doesn't believe it. And she says, you will. And she leaves. So that chapter was very important because not only did it break off Egwene and Rand's relationship pretty solidly there, but it also gave you the most in-depth perspective into what they're doing when they channel, and I think that's absolutely fascinating. So, Chapter 8 is titled Hard Heads, and Elaine doesn't even think that Rand realizes only Egwene left. Elaine's still in the room. Finally, he does realize it and is like, I didn't realize you were still... I'm not a fool, my lady. It's not every day someone tells you they don't love you, my lady. And she's like, Elaine is like, if you call me that again, I'm going to call you Lord Dragon, and I'm going to start curtsying. Even the Queen of Andor might curtsy to the dragon, and I'm only her daughter. And he's like, oh, Light, don't do that. I won't, Rand, but if you call me by my name, I won't. Elaine, say it. And he says, Elaine. Good. And she asks him, did it hurt very much, what Egwene told you, I mean? No. Yes, some, I don't know. Fair's fair. I sound like a fool, don't I? No, not to me. I told her the pure truth, but I don't think she believed me. Suppose I didn't want to believe it of her either. Elaine feels butterflies in her, but tries to keep her poise, because she thinks if I don't, he'll think I'm just a foolish girl. And he asks suddenly, would you like a flower? A flower? Yes. And he scooped up a bunch of feathers from the mattress that tore open, and he says, I'll be careful. It's only a little bit of the power, and I'll be very careful. And she realizes she has to give him some degree of trust and says, I would like that, Rand. And Rand stares at the flowers and after a few seconds says, flowers, that's no fit gift for you. Elaine sees clearly he tried to embrace Sidon and failed. And then he walks over to a metallic cloth and says, "Now this is a proper gift for the daughter Eravandor. You could have a seamstress make," and he kind of fumbles, and she's like, "I'm sure a seamstress would have many ideas." But then she says, after receiving the gift, "Rand, do you like me?" "Like you? Of course I like you. I like you very much." And she thinks to herself, does he have to look like he doesn't understand what I'm asking at all? And she says, "I am fond of you, Rand." And her stomach feels like it's going up into her throat, and her hands and feet feel like ice. And she says, "More than fond." And she thinks to herself, he has to say more than like first. And she almost giggles to herself. I've got to keep control of myself. I can't let him see me behave like a moon-eyed girl. And he says, "I am fond of you." "I'm not usually so forward." And she's like, "No, can't say that again." That he's going to start thinking of Bearlane. And suddenly Rand starts blushing, and she's like, "He is thinking of Bearlane. Burn him." And she says, "Soon I'll have to go, Rand. Leave Tyr. I may not see you again for many months. I couldn't let you go, not without telling you how I feel, and I am very fond of you." "Elayne, I am fond of you. I feel I want..." Elayne, I don't know what to say, how to... I don't... And she says, "Rand, I'm not asking for... I only want you to know how I feel. That's all." And she says, very forward, "I want you to kiss me." "Kiss you?" "Elayne, I don't want to promise more than... I mean, it's not like we're betrothed. Not that I'm suggesting we should be. It's just I'm fond of you. I just don't want you to think I..." And she just laughs, and she's like, "I don't know how things are done in Two Rivers, but in Caemlyn you don't wait until you're betrothed to kiss a girl. And it doesn't mean you have to get betrothed either. But perhaps you don't know how." And suddenly his arms wrap around her, and she is enveloped in his arms and a kiss. And her head spins, and her toes try to curl up. And he says, "Forgive me for interrupting you. I'm just a backward shepherd from the Two Rivers." And she says, "You're uncouth. And you didn't shave this morning, but I wouldn't say you're backwards." And he says, "Elayne," she puts her hand over his mouth and says, "I don't want to hear anything from you don't mean with your whole heart. Not now or ever." And she's thinking to myself, oh God, I was so forward. Speaking up like that, asking for a kiss. Asking. I'm not Bearlane. I shouldn't be doing that. And she thinks back to what Min said about sharing Rand. What Min saw happens, but she would not share him with Bearlane. And so she says to Rand, "You won't lack for company after I go. Just remember, some women see a man with their heart, and others see no more than a bauble to wear. And I'm one who sees with her heart." "Do you know what you haven't said to me, Rand? You haven't tried to frighten me away by telling me how dangerous you are. Don't try now. It's too late." And then she says, "Are you sorry for what you did to us, Rand?" And he's like, "I didn't mean to frighten you. Egwene made me angry. I said I was sorry, and I am." And she's like, "And for the pinch?" And his face gets red, and he's like, No, I'm not sorry for that. The two of you talking over my head like I were a lump of wood with no ears, you deserved as much, both of you, and I won't say different." Suddenly, Elayne grasps onto Saidar, not very proficient with healing. She does her best, and suddenly his eyes widen in surprise, like he's no longer in pain. His butt doesn't hurt anymore. And she says, "For being honest." Suddenly there's a knock on the door, and Gaul looks in. And he has his head down and glances quickly, lowers it, and is like, "Oh, they're not doing anything," and raises it. And Elaine's face gets so red because she realized Gaul clearly thought that they might be in the the middle of something. And he just says, "The Terrans are here, the High Lords." And Elayne says, "I'll go then, but think on what I have said." Elayne walks in, and the High Lords come in, and Rand just watches her and is like, can't even believe what just happened. As he's talking with the High Lords, he keeps thinking about Elaine, but he also realizes the High Lords are being a lot more diffident than usual. Like, they're submitting to him more. Clearly, word of what Rand did to High Lord Torian earlier today got out, and so they're like kind of walking on eggshells. Rand is basically telling the High Lords that they have to lower taxes, and they're like, well, if we lower them, then they're gonna get angry when we raise them again later. And Rand's like, you're gonna have riots if you drive them off their farms. You're going to do what I say. And one of the guys is like, there's too many farmers as it is. There's a civil war in Karheim. Karheim can't even buy grain right now. And Rand's like, okay, if Karheim can't buy grain, you're gonna sell to Ilion. And they're like, Ilion? They're scum. We're not gonna go to Ilion. And Rand's like, you are. And then Rand says, first, you are going to cut taxes on farmers by 3/4, and you're going to cut them in half for everyone else. Do not argue. Do it. Second, you're going to go to the first of Mayene, Bearlane, and ask her for assistance in trade. And the High Lords grit their teeth, but they give him fake smiles and listen. We go to Egwene's point of view, and she runs into Mat walking, and he seems quiet, so she asks if he's all right. And Mat speaks up and says, I need some advice. And Egwene's like surprised, and he's like, I'm trying to decide whether to do something, and I don't know what's gonna happen. I have all these holes in my memory, and I keep speaking in the old tongue. I don't know what to do. And Egwene says reluctantly, I might know a way, but only if Moraine agrees. And he's like, I'm not going to Moraine. I don't want anything to do with the Aes Sedai. You're not Aes Sedai yet, so I don't, you're my friend. And she's like, all right. There's this twisted doorway, Ter Angriel. And she starts telling him about the doorway that Moraine talked about how you can get 3 answers, but says it's very dangerous and you must not try without Moraine's approval. And he just says, I'd have to be a fool to try it regardless. Don't tell Moraine about this conversation, though, Egwene. And she's like, I won't. And Egwene's like, promise me, though, you will not use it. And he says, I promise, not unless my life depends on it. And he thinks to himself, my life definitely depends on it. All right, Chapter 9 is titled Decisions. Mat's walking around, and he's like, no one will play cards with me. Everyone heard about what happened, and they think because I'm close to the Dragon Reborn, they don't want to be close to me. I can't even get in bed with any of the women anymore, because Mat was quite the player, it seems. He goes to the room with the Ter Angriel, but doesn't go inside, thinking he'd have to be a fool to try it after what Egwene said. He goes into the city to try to gamble a bit, but, they're not using a lot of money because they're commoners out there, and he's gotten used to gambling with lords, so he's like, so he keeps going back to the stone, trying not to think about why he hasn't left the city yet. We go to Perrin's point of view. Perrin is thinking to himself, I've got to find a way to get Fail out of here. He keeps hearing news about wars and thinking, I can't send her off to that. And he basically just keeps looking for something to get her away. We go to Egwene's point of view, and they're questioning the 2 Black Ajah members again. And apparently, Aviendha has begun visiting Egwene, seemingly of her own choice. And she was kind of wary at first of Egwene being Aes Sedai, and Egwene does not tell them that she's not a full Aes Sedai yet, by the way. Even because remember, Egwene and Nynaeve and Elaine are just accepted. They're not full Aes Sedai, but they're kind of passing themselves off as full Aes Sedai, and Moraine is just kind of letting it happen. But as they spend more time together, they seem to enjoy each other's company quite a lot. And Aviendha, Elaine, and Egwene consider themselves quite close friends at this point, apparently. Then we switch to Elaine's point of view. She's noting that while Egwene and Aviendha and her are spending a lot of time together, Nynaeve seems to spend most of her nights walking with Lan and actually cooking for him. And in Elaine's spare time, and when Rand has time, Elaine just happens to be close by. And they become quite good at finding secluded areas where they can be alone, if only for a few minutes. Elaine even sort of made a little conspiracy with the Maidens of the Spear. They seem to know every single nook and cranny in the Stone of Tyr, and they let her know whenever Rand was alone. They seemed to think their relationship kind of like sport, and tried to help them out a little bit. Elaine starts giving Rand little bits of advice on how to deal with the High Lords, and he takes it, which makes Elaine happy because he listens to her. And it fast forwards to Rand in a room with two of the High Lords, and Rand is furious. And they're like, here's the proposition for you to sign, Lord Dragon. Grain for the ships, and he's like, and 2,000 gold from Tyr. And he feels like his stomach is boiling because he wants to pound these fools with his own fist. 2,000 men under the command of High Lord Torian. And they're like, High Lord Torian is very interested in these affairs, Lord Dragon. He's like, he has an interest in forcing his attentions on women who won't even look at him. I said grain, not soldiers, and not Torian. Have you even done what I've asked? Suddenly, the scrolls that they wanted him to sign burst into flame, and then he turns his back, and he says calmly, you will go to Bearlane. By tomorrow midday, you will have offered her the treaty I want, or by sunset tomorrow, I will hang the both of you. If I need to hang High Lords every day, I will. I will send every last one of you to the gallows if you will not obey me. Now get out of my sight. And they back away, bowing constantly, under their breath, saying how loyal they will be to him forever. And he yells, get out! And they run. And Rand just trembles, disgusted by them. But he thinks to himself, I'm disgusted at myself as well, threatening to hang people because they don't do what I tell them, and even worse, meaning it. But he thinks to himself, I'm not mad yet, only angry. Light, I'm so angry. But the Dark Friends will be put on a ship to Tar Valon tomorrow, and Elaine will be leaving, and Egwene and Nynaeve, of course. And Rand just reads again the prophecies. Twice and twice shall he be marked, twice to live and twice to die. Once the heron to set his path, twice the heron to name him true. Once the dragon for remembrance lost, twice the dragon for the price he must pay. But if the herons, quote-unquote, named him true, what is the need for dragons? For that matter, what is a dragon? The only dragon that Rand had ever heard of was Lews Therin Telamon. Except Rand was the dragon now. But he can't just be marked with himself. What does that even mean? By the way, they don't seem to understand that the symbol on the flag is a dragon, because that's not a thing in their world. So, yeah. And then he hears a voice. You are changed from when I last saw you. Stronger. Harder. And he turns and sees a woman dressed in white and silver. One of the most beautiful women he's ever seen again. And he says, Selene, where'd you come from? How did you get here? I thought you had to be in Karhine or something. And she says, I go where I wish to be. You've been marked, but no matter. You were mine, and you are mine. Anyone else is just a caretaker. I will lay claim to what is mine openly now. And he says, Selene, we had pleasant days together. I'll never forget your courage or help, but there was never more between us than companionship. We traveled together, but that was the end of it. You'll stay here in the stone, in the best apartments we have, and when peace returns to Karhine, I'll make sure that your estates are returned to you if I can. And she says, Estates in Karhine? I may have had estates in those lands once. The land has changed so much. Nothing is as it was. Selene is only a name I use sometimes, Lews Therin. The name I made my own is Lanfear. Rand just laughs. Poor joke, Selene. I'd joke about the Dark One as soon as a Forsaken. And my name is Rand, not Lews Therin. She says, We call ourselves the Chosen, not the Forsaken. Chosen to rule the world forever. We will live forever. You can as well. And he looks at her, reaching for Sidon, and he reached for it, but he struck a wall, keeping him from the source. You can't be. Light, you are one of them. And slowly he backed away. If he reached for Kalendor, he'd have a weapon. He might not be able to channel, but he could use it as a sword still. But could he fight a woman? Selene? No, Lanfear, the Forsaken. He reached out for Kalendor, and there was a wall between him and it. And she says, I cannot trust you fully, Lews Therin. Not yet. Not with that, certainly. There's only 2 more powerful that a man can use. One, at least, I know still exists. And he says, stop calling me that. My name is Rand. Rand al'Thor. You are Lews Therin Telamon. Oh, physically nothing is the same except your height. But I would know who's behind those eyes even if I'd found you in the cradle. How much easier everything would be if I found you then, if I'd been free to... Do you wish to see my true appearance? You can't remember that either, can you? And Rand thinks back to the other 2 Forsaken he's seen, Aginor and Bothamel, both of whom died back in the Eye of the World, Book 1. And they looked very withered, so withered it seemed odd they could be alive. He didn't want to really see what Lanfear really looked like. But then the air rippled around her, and she changed. She looked older than him, but not just old, like mature, and even more beautiful, if that were even possible. And his mouth went dry and his throat tightened. And she said, I was buried deeply, in a dreamless sleep where time did not flow. Now you see me as I am, and I have you in my hands. And she draws her fingernail along his face. The time for games and subterfuge is past, Lews Therin. Long past. Do you mean to kill me then? The light burn you, I kill you, she said incredulously. Kill you? I mean to have you, forever. You were mine long before that pale-haired milksop stole you, before she ever saw you. You loved me, and you loved power. And he felt dazed. Those words were true. He knew they were, but where had they come from? He certainly never seen her before. And Selene, Lanfear, seemed startled as well, but recovered quickly. You've learned much. You'd have done much, I'd not believe you could unaided, but you're still fumbling around. Some of the others fear too much to wait. Samael, Raven, Moghedian, others perhaps, but those certainly. They will come for you. They will not try to turn your heart. They'll come at you by stealth and destroy you while you sleep, because of their fear. But there are those who could teach you. None would dare oppose you then. Teach me? You want me to let one of the Forsaken teach me? A male Forsaken who had been an Aes Sedai in the Age of Legends? No. I oppose them, and you. I hate everything you've done and everything you stand for. I'll destroy you if I can, you and the Dark One and every last Forsaken. Do you know why some of us fear you? Do you have any idea? Because they are afraid the great Lord of the Dark will give you a place above them. And they're right to be afraid. The great Lord does want you. He wants to exalt you above all others. That's ridiculous. The Dark One's still bound in Sheo Ghul, or I'd be fighting Tarmangaiden right now. And if he knows I exist, he'd want me dead. Oh, he knows. He knows more than you'd suspect. If you go to Sheo Ghul, into the pit of doom, you can hear him, bathe in his presence. Words cannot describe it. If you kneel to the Dark Lord, he will put you above all others. Lews Therin, Asmodean will teach you to wield the power without killing you. Let me help you. We could destroy the others. The great Lord won't care. We could destroy all of them, even Asmodean, once he's taught you everything. You and I could rule the world together under the great Lord, forever. There are 2 great Sa-Angreal made just before the breaking. One you can use, and one I can. far greater than the power of Kalendor. Their power is beyond imagining. With those, we could even challenge the Great Lord or the Creator themselves. I could take you with me. I could have you turn to the Great Lord. Whatever you want or believe, there are ways. You are always stubborn. I won't take you this time. I want you to come to me of your own will, and I will have it. The bonds around Rand fade, and she asks, "What's the matter? You're frowning." And his eyes slide past a fellow slipping in the doors with a knife. He pushed Lanfear out of the way, reached for the true source. The shield blocking him vanished as he touched it, and suddenly he's holding a sword with a red gold flame. He digs his sword into the assailant's heart. A gray man. "This makes no sense," he says. "You could have killed me easily. Why distract me for a gray man to sneak up on me?" She looks at him and says, "I do not use the soulless. I told you there are differences among the chosen. It seems I was a day late in my judgment, but there's still time for you to come with me. You don't do 1/10 of the part of what you can. Come with me and learn. Or do you mean to kill me now? I loosed you to defend yourself." Suddenly he asks, "What did you do to them?" Looking back to the doors. "What did you do to the Aiel outside?" "Nothing. Don't go out there. This may just be a test, but even a test may kill you." Rand goes to the door, flings it open, and enters a scene of pure madness. So that was a lot of relationship stuff. There's a lot of relationship stuff in early book 4, so that's why these are taking a while. I hope that's all right. I think it's super interesting. All right, chapter 10. The Stone Stands. Rand leaves the room and finds Aiel dead in the doorway. He runs into a Myrddraal almost immediately, and he hears battle cries as tons of men fight the shadow spawn in the stone. His power-wrought sword meets the Fade's blade, lightning flashing from them, and his blade shears the Fade in two. As he kills the Fade, Trollocs that were bonded to it also die. He orders the Defenders of the Stone to come to him, and they accept his leadership, following, and he leads them to the stone, killing as many Shadowspawn as he can. Sometimes Aiel join him, sometimes people break off to fight Shadowspawn that are there. He even sees Trollocs fighting Trollocs, and had to assume that the Myrddraal lost control of them and the Trollocs' bloodlust took over. At one point, he even sees two Fades fighting one another. Suddenly he hears a voice. "You risk everything rushing about wildly with that sword," and he turns and sees Lanfear, who has followed him. "You build a hut of twigs when you could have marble palaces at a snap of your fingers. You could have had their lives and souls with little effort, and instead they nearly killed you. Join with me." And she basically admits that she's the reason the Trollocs and Myrddraal are fighting each other. But says, "You can expect no open aid from me in the future." And Rand desperately tries to remember how he blocked Egwene and Elaine from the source earlier in the yesterday or whatever, or a couple days ago. He can remember he did it, but not how. He had to remember, and suddenly he flies across the hallway and crashes into a wall. Just as she crashed against the opposite wall, by him using the one power. Both of them spread eagle attached to the walls, held by powers neither can see. "You use the smallest fraction of what you're capable of, Lews Therin. Where is Kalendor? Still up in your bedchamber like a useless ornament? Do you think yours is the only hand that could wield it now that you've drawn it free from where it was? If Samael is here, he will take it. Even Moghedien would take it to deny you." And Rand panics. Kalendor in the hands of a male Forsaken, and he feels half mad with fear and frustration. Suddenly, he lurched away from the wall, free. He looks at Lanfear, and she's still there, held by his flows. If he tied off the flows, she might tear down half the stone trying to get free. if the Trollocs didn't kill her. But he couldn't just bear the thought of leaving a woman there for the Trollocs. But Lanfear did not let him make this decision. Suddenly, the flows of Sidon jolt back to Rand, and he drops onto the floor in shock and pain. "You can't do that." And she says, "I don't have to see a flow of the power to unravel it, if I know what it is and where. You have much to learn." Clearly, Lanfear cut his weaves. "Are you forgetting Callandor, then?" He hesitated, one of the Forsaken right in front of him. But he knew she spoke truth, and turning, he ran for Callandor as she laughed behind. As he ran through the Stone of Tyr, he didn't fight any longer, desperate to get to Callandor. He saw Perrin and Fail fighting with their axes and knives, but knew that if he stopped to help, if the Forsaken took Callandor while he did that, none of them would live to see another day. He bursts into his room, the dead unmoved, and sees Callandor, the sword that is not a sword, sitting there, shining with the light of the sun, waiting. And he touched it. Rand pulled at Sidon, at Callandor. The sword that is not a sword blazed in his hands as if he held the noon sunlight itself. And the power filled him, hammering like solid thunder, and the taint rushed through him in a flood of blackness, molten rock pulsing along his veins. The cold inside him could have frozen the sun itself. He had to use Sidon, or he would burst like a rotting melon. The Myrddraal in the hallway turned to flee, and suddenly black clothes and armor crumpled to the floor, only leaving oily motes floating in the air. Rand didn't even realize he channeled until it was done, and he couldn't have said what he did if his life depended on it. But nothing could harm him while he held Callandor. He held the heartbeat of the entire world in his hand. Fades and Trollocs all over, disintegrated as motes of blackness were all that were left in the air of them. He gave them no chance to run. He walked calmly towards them, channeling as he did so, flames roaring from beneath the Shadowspawn in pillars of fire. And by the time he reached where they stood, the flames were gone, nothing but ash remaining. He continued walking through the stone, burning Myrddraal and Trollocs alive, no matter what he saw. But he began to run faster. It was not enough. He couldn't move fast enough. People were still dying. When he killed Trollocs in these handfuls, but there were so many. He stopped in a hallway surrounded by the dead. He had to do something. This wasn't enough. He had to do something more. He had to kill them all of them at once. The taint of Sidon rolled over him, a mountain of rotting filth threatening to bury his soul beneath it. He raised Callandor above his head and drew on the source, drew it until it seemed he had to scream screams of frozen flame. Just beneath the ceiling, right above his head, air began to revolve in a circle, spinning faster and faster, with streaks of red and black and silver within it, roiling and collapsing inwards, boiling, whining as it whirled and grew smaller. Rand begins to sweat as he stares at it. He has no idea what it was he's created, but he's connected to it. And whatever it is, it had mass, weight, growing even as it fell into itself and got smaller. Callandor was bright and get brighter still, too bright to even look at. He closed his eyes as the light burned through his eyelids. The power raced through him, a raging torrent that threatened to carry all that was Rand into the spinning void. He had to let go. He had to. He forced his eyes open, and the thought came into his head. Now. The thought floated like cackling laughter on the edge of his own awareness, and he severed the flows that were rushing out of him, leaving the thing in the air, whirling like a drill. Now. And again, as the word came unbidden to his mind, lightnings flashed out of the ceiling, left and right, like silver streams. As Myrddraal stepped out of corridors, before they could even take a second step, a half-dozen flaring streaks stabbed down, blasting them apart into bits. Other lightnings streamed out of what he had created, fanning down every corridor, replaced by more and more erupting sounds every second. Rand had no idea what he did. He could only stand there as the power filled him with the need to use it. He could feel the Trollocs and Myrddraal dying, feel the lightning striking and killing. He could kill them everywhere in the world. He knew it. With Callandor, he could do anything, and anything trying to kill him would die just as surely. But he knew, as he tried to kill everyone in the world, that would kill him as well. It was too much power. The lightnings faded and died as the last shadow spawn fell, and the spinning mass above him imploded with a loud of air that rushed inside of it, but Callandor still shone like the sun. Moraine stood a dozen paces from him and asks, how? What you've done, I wouldn't have thought possible. And Lan starts to walk towards, and Moraine flings her hand out, stopping him, as if Rand were even too dangerous for Lan to approach, and she asks, "Are you well, Rand?" And Rand pulls his gaze away from her and looks upon the body of a small, dark-haired girl, barely more than a child. She was sprawled on her back, eyes wide and fixed on the ceiling, blood blackening the bosom of her dress. Sadly, he brushed the strands of hair from her face and thought, "Light, she's only a child. I was too late. Why didn't I do it sooner? She's just a child." And Moraine says, "I'll see that someone takes care of her, Rand. You can't help her now." But his hand shook so hard on Callandor, and he says, "With this, I can do anything. Anything." And Moraine shouts, "Rand!" But he would not listen, and the power blazed within him. Callandor blazed. He was the power, and he channeled, flows directly into the body of the child, searching, trying, fumbling to imbue her with the power, and she lurched to her feet, her arms and legs unnatural, jerking around at ways that shouldn't happen. And Moraine shouts, "Rand, you cannot do this, not this." And he thinks, breathe. She has to breathe. And the girl's chest rose and fell. Heart has to beat. Blood, thick and dark, oozed from the wound in her chest. And he thought, live, Burnew. I didn't mean to be late. Her eyes stared at him, lifeless. Tears trickled down his cheeks. And he shouts, "She has to live. Heal her, Moraine. I don't know how. Heal her." "Death cannot be healed, Rand. You are not the creator." And as he stared into the dead eyes of the girl, he withdrew his flows, and the body fell stiffly to the ground. The body. And he threw his head back and howled as loud and wild as any Trolloc. Fire sizzled into the walls and ceilings as he lashed out in pain. He released Sidon, pushing it away, and it felt like pushing away a boulder, and strength drained out of him. But the taint remained, as always. And he asks, "Elayne, Perrin, and the rest, was I too late for them too?" "You are not too late, Rand." "Are they still alive?" he shouted. "They are." And he nodded in relief, doing his best not to look at the girl's body. "How did the Trollocs get in? They surely didn't climb the walls like the Aiel." "How?" And Lan answers, "There were barges tied up at the docks, and no one seemed to question why so many came, and no one bothered to inspect it." Suddenly Rand felt a chill passing his weariness out of his body, but he still felt like he had a hard day's work. And Moiraine says, I left some of the pain and tiredness. You do need to sleep tonight. And Rand tells her Lanfear was here, but this wasn't her. And she says, I doubt she'll try to kill you yet. We don't know much of the Forsaken, but we do know she loved Lews Therin Telamon. You're definitely not safe from her, but I don't think she'll try to kill you as long as she thinks she might have Lews Therin back. Rand looks away and just says, Tomorrow. Tomorrow? Moiraine asks. Tomorrow I will tell you what I'm going to do. Some of it, he thought, at least. If Moiraine knew everything he planned to do, well, her face made him want to laugh. And Lanfear had given him almost one of the last pieces he needed without knowing it. One more step tonight. But he thought to himself, even though I could do anything with Callandor, I'm not mad yet. Not mad enough for that. And he said, tomorrow, a good night to us all, the light willing. But he thought, tomorrow, he would begin to unleash another kind of lightning, a lightning that might save him or kill him. He was not mad yet. And that's where we'll stop for now.